The streets of Honolulu shimmered under the golden wash of sunset when a young Bruno Mars first discovered that music could be more than sound. It could move through the body like lightning. Long before the stadium lights and the sequined jackets, he was just a barefoot boy on the sidewalks of Waikiki, watching his father's band rehearse with a fascination too big for his small frame to contain. Neighbors remembered him as the boy who never stood still. Every radio jingle, every car stereo that passed, every rhythm that hummed from the open windows of local bars turned into movement. He would mimic drummers with sticks, replicate guitarists with a broom handle, and above all, he would dance. That dance, sharp, precise, and yet effortlessly fluid, would one day evolve into the iconic finesse style that defined his career. But the roots of it were hidden deep in his past, nurtured by family, struggle, and something mysterious that only a few ever witnessed. A legacy of motion. His father, Peter Hernandez, had always believed that rhythm was inherited, not learned. You can't teach someone to feel, he used to say. You either got the groove in your bones, or you don't. Bruno had it, more than anyone. His mother would often tell stories of how he would bounce rhythmically even before he could walk, shaking his crib in time with the radio. By the age of 4, Bruno was already performing in small shows across Honolulu, dressed in tiny Elvis costumes, copying the King's hip flicks and confident swagger. But what fascinated audiences was how naturally he moved. It wasn't imitation, it was transformation. He absorbed the rhythm and became it. However, there was a secret, something his family never spoke about in interviews. A mystery surrounding a night that changed the course of his childhood forever. The Whispering Drummer. It was 1992, during one of his father's regular gigs at a dimly lit club on the edge of the city. Bruno, only 6 years old, sat backstage, his legs swinging off a stool, mesmerized by the pounding drums that reverberated through the floor. But amid the crowd's noise and cigarette smoke, a strange sound began to weave through the rhythm, an unexplainable echo. Bruno followed the sound to the back alley, where he found an old man drumming on overturned buckets. The man's hands moved so fast they blurred, his eyes closed, lost in his own world. When he noticed the boy, he smiled, toothless and warm, and said, "You hear it too, don't you?" "Hear what?" Bruno asked. "The beat beneath the beat," the man replied. "Most people dance on top of the rhythm, but real magic happens when you dance inside it." He taught Bruno to clap not on the beat, but just before it, to feel the pulse that came before the sound. "That's where the soul hides," he said. That lesson, cryptic and childlike, became the foundation of what would one day be known as the finesse rhythm, a movement style that felt both retro and futuristic, tight yet free, calculated yet effortless. When Bruno looked back years later, he would say that moment felt otherworldly, like meeting a ghost who taught him how to move time itself. Fame, flash, and the forgotten grew. Fast forward 2 decades. The world knew Bruno Mars as a pop genius, a singer, producer, and showman whose energy could light up Super Bowl stages. Songs like Uptown Funk had turned him into a household name, a performer who blurred the lines between eras, blending the swagger of the 80s with the sharpness of modern funk. But after years on tour, something strange began to happen. His performances were becoming too perfect, rehearsed to mechanical precision. Critics began to whisper that the soul of his dance had faded. He could feel it too. There was something missing, the pulse beneath the beat. In 2017, during a sleepless night in Los Angeles, Bruno found himself watching old VHS tapes his father had sent him, grainy footage of his childhood performances. As he watched his younger self spinning, laughing, and dancing barefoot on a wooden stage, he noticed something uncanny. His movements weren't choreographed. They were alive. He turned off the TV, stood in front of a mirror, and tried to move like that again. But the rhythm didn't come. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the night, maybe imagination, maybe something more, he thought he heard that familiar echo, the beat beneath the beat. Returned to the islands months later, he quietly flew back to Honolulu under a different name. No entourage, no cameras. He rented a small bungalow near Waikiki Beach, the same area where he had grown up. Locals were shocked to see a man who looked like Bruno Mars buying breakfast sandwiches at corner shops and walking barefoot along the sand. But no one dared to approach him. He wasn't there to vacation. He was searching for that sound, for that feeling, for the old man who once played buckets in an alley. Every night, he wandered through local bars and underground dance clubs, watching unknown performers move to live jazz and funk. And every night, he tried to find the groove. But the man was nowhere to be found. Until one night that it was nearly midnight when he heard it. Faint but unmistakable. A syncopated rhythm bouncing off the back walls of an old club called the Ember Room. Inside, the lights were low, the air thick with smoke and sweat. On stage, an elderly drummer was playing, and Bruno froze. The face was older, the hands slower, but the rhythm, it was the same. He walked closer, and the old man looked up. "You came back," he said softly. Bruno didn't know how to respond. "You remember me?" "Of course," the drummer smiled. "You still dancing on top of the beat?" Bruno laughed, half ashamed. "Trying to." The man stopped playing, then stopped trying. "Listen again." And that night, under the dim red glow of the Ember Room, Bruno Mars rediscovered the lost heartbeat of his music. The rain outside the Ember Room came down like a slow rhythm, soft, deliberate, almost musical. Inside, Bruno Mars sat at a corner table, his hands still trembling from the experience. The old drummer, who introduced himself only as Kai, poured 2 glasses of whiskey and sat opposite him. "So," Kai began, his eyes glinting beneath the flicker of a dying bulb. "You've built an empire on rhythm. But you forgot where rhythm sleeps." Bruno leaned forward. "You mean the beat beneath the beat?" Kai smiled. "You remembered." For hours, they talked. Not about fame, not about awards or chart records, but about pulse, movement, silence. Kai explained how every great dancer doesn't just follow sound. They predict it. "The body," he said, "must move a heartbeat before the note arrives. That's the secret. You don't chase music, you create it." Bruno listened like a student hearing gospel for the first time. Kai made him clap, tap, and step in impossible patterns, training his body to move in ways that defied logic. They stayed there until sunrise, rhythm echoing through the wooden floorboards like ancient thunder. When Bruno finally stepped out into the dawn, something inside him had shifted. He felt lighter, like he'd left behind the weight of celebrity and rediscovered the boy who danced barefoot on Hawaiian soil. Relearning the groove back at his rented bungalow, Bruno transformed the living room into a practice studio. Mirrors lined the walls, speakers filled the corners, and the floor was scratched from endless repetition. For weeks, he practiced until his clothes were soaked and his breath came in ragged bursts. He began incorporating movements that defied the conventional rules of choreography: small, subtle pulses, shoulder dips that preceded the rhythm, knee slides that arrived just before the snare. He called it micro-timing, a fusion of instinct and anticipation. But this time, it wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. He started recording himself, analyzing the tension between beats. Sometimes, he would dance in complete silence, letting the memory of a rhythm guide him. Other times, he'd play a metronome and try to move between its clicks. Slowly, the style that had once made him legendary, the finesse flow, began to return, yet it wasn't the same. It was rawer, deeper, almost spiritual. He realized that finesse wasn't just choreography, it was philosophy. The silence before sound. One evening, while experimenting with rhythm exercises, Bruno invited a few trusted collaborators to join him: choreographers, session musicians, and old friends from his early days in the Hooligans band. Among them was Phil Lawrence, his longtime creative partner, who hadn't seen him so obsessed since the making of 24K Magic. "What are you chasing this time?" Phil asked, wiping sweat from his brow after hours of dance drills. Bruno paused, looking at the faint reflection of himself in the mirror.